Firefly's Summer, a story of home, heart, and the hands that shaped me. Well now, come on up here and sit a spell. Pull that old wooden chair a little closer. The one with the worn armrest where my daddy used to rest his coffee cup every morning for 37 years. The sun's painting the sky all shades of amber and rose tonight, just like it did back when I was knee-high to a grasshopper, running barefoot through these same fields that stretch out before us now. You can smell it, can't you? That sweet scent of honeysuckle mixing with the last cut of hay. And somewhere in the distance, Martha Jenkins is probably pulling her famous cornbread out of the oven, the kind that makes your mouth water just thinking about it. The screen door on her back porch will creak open any minute now, and she'll call out to her grandchildren to come wash up for supper, just like she's done every evening for the past 40 years. If this kind of story brings back something in your heart, something that feels like coming home after being away too.
This shirt I'm wearing, it stands for something real. It's for those who remember America's proud days, built on hard work, unity, and respect for the flag. We've got styles for men, women, and even the kids. Great quality, timeless spirit. Just point your camera at the QR code and wear what America stands for.
Long. Go ahead and subscribe to PorchTales, give it a like, and share it with someone who still remembers how it used to be, when neighbors knew each other's names and a handshake meant something that lasted. I reckon I was about 7 years old when I first understood what it meant to belong somewhere, really belong. It was the summer of 1995, and the corn was standing tall as telephone poles, swaying in that gentle breeze that only comes in late July when the air is thick with promise and the earth smells rich with growing things. My mama, God rest her soul, had sent me out to collect eggs from our old hen house, the one my granddaddy built with his own two hands back in '52. The wood was weathered gray as storm clouds, and the screen door would sing that familiar creak every time you pulled it open, a sound that still echoes in my dreams sometimes, calling me back to simpler times when the biggest worry I had was whether the hens would let me near their nests without a fuss. Now, our farm wasn't much to look at from the outside. We had maybe 40 acres of good bottomland, rolling hills that caught the morning mist like a blanket, a small herd of cattle that my daddy treated like they were family pets, and that old red barn that leaned just a little to the left like it was tired from holding up too many memories. The paint was peeling in places, showing the weathered wood underneath, and swallows had built their nests up in the rafters where they'd raise their babies every spring, filling the air with their cheerful chatter. But it was ours, and more importantly, it was home to everything that mattered. The kitchen window looked out over the vegetable garden where Mama grew tomatoes so red and sweet they'd make you want to cry, and green beans that snapped with the sound of summer itself, and rows of corn that Daddy would tend with the patience of a man who understood that good things take time. That particular morning, the dew was still heavy on the grass, making everything sparkle like diamonds scattered across God's green earth. I was making my way past the chicken coop, listening to the hens cluck and fuss over their morning routine, when I heard old Mr. Henderson calling my name from across the fence line. His voice carried across the still morning air like music, warm and familiar as Sunday church bells. Now, Mr. Henderson was the kind of man who seemed to have been carved from the same oak trees that dotted our property, strong and steady and built to last. His hands were rough as bark from 60 years of working the land, but his voice was soft as butter on warm biscuits, and his eyes held the kind of wisdom that only comes from watching seasons turn for more years than most folks can count. He was standing there in his faded overalls, the ones with the patch on the left knee that his wife Clara had sewn on with such care. You could tell it was stitched with love, and his old straw hat pushed back on his head the way it always was when he was thinking about something important. "Boy," he called out, waving me over with that slow, deliberate motion that spoke of a man who never wasted energy on anything that wasn't worth doing. "Come here a minute. Got something I want to show you." I set down my basket of eggs, still warm from the nest and smooth as polished stones in my small hands, and ran through the tall grass that separated our properties. The grass was wet with dew and tickled my bare legs as I made my way to where Mr. Henderson was standing next to his old John Deere tractor. The green paint faded, but the engine still purring like a contented cat in a sunny window. In his weathered hands, gentle as a mother's touch, he held something small and delicate, a baby bird that must have fallen from its nest in the old elm tree that stood guard over both our farms like an ancient sentinel. "Found this little fella this morning when I came out to check the fence," he said, his voice carrying that gentle wisdom that only comes from a lifetime of watching things grow and change, and sometimes need a helping hand. The baby bird was no bigger than a walnut, its eyes still closed, its tiny chest rising and falling with the quick rhythm of new life. Mama bird's been circling around, worried sick. Sometimes, son, the best thing you can do is help something that can't help itself. That's what neighbors are for, what family's for, what being human is all about. He showed me how to cup my hands, just so, creating a safe little nest for the tiny creature, my palms forming a warm shelter that reminded me of prayer hands in church. Its heartbeat was so fast and fragile against my skin, like holding a piece of summer lightning, like touching something sacred and wild and precious all at once. Together, we fashioned a makeshift ladder from an old milk crate and some boards that had been seasoned by years of weather, and I climbed up, my young arms strong and sure, to return that baby bird to its home high in the branches where it belonged. The mama bird was waiting, perched on a branch nearby, her song anxious and hopeful at the same time. When I placed her baby back in the nest, carefully as placing a prayer in God's hands, she flew down and looked right at me with those bright black eyes, and I swear I could see gratitude there, pure and simple as morning sunlight. The relief in her song as she welcomed her baby back was something I'll never forget, a melody that spoke of love and protection and the fierce joy of family reunited. "That's what neighbors do, son," Mr. Henderson said as we watched the reunion from below, the mama bird fussing over her baby with the kind of attention that only a mother can give. "We look out for each other, help when help's needed, and celebrate when there's celebrating to be done. That's what makes a community more than just a bunch of houses scattered across the countryside. That's what makes it home." Those words stuck with me through all the years that followed, through all the seasons that turned from green to gold to white and back again, like a promise I carried in my pocket wherever I went. They echoed in my mind when I was older, sitting in Millie's diner on Main Street, watching how she knew exactly how each person liked their coffee, how she remembered their names and their troubles and their small victories, how she made everyone who walked through that door feel like they mattered. Millie's place was more than just a restaurant. It was the beating heart of our little town, the place where stories got told and retold until they became legend, where news traveled faster than a morning paper, where strangers became friends over coffee and conversation. The building itself had been there since the 1940s, red brick worn smooth by time and weather, with big windows that led in the morning light and showed the world going by on Main Street. The red vinyl booths were cracked in places, held together with duct tape and memories, but they held conversations that shaped lives, dreams that took flight over plates of eggs and bacon, love stories that began with shared slices of pie. The jukebox in the corner still played Patsy Cline and Hank Williams, songs that seemed to understand the rhythm of small-town life, melodies that spoke of heartbreak and hope and the enduring power of simple things. You could drop a quarter in and hear Crazy or Your Cheatin' Heart, and somehow those old songs made everything make sense, connected you to something larger than yourself, to generations of people who had loved and lost and found their way home again. The coffee was strong enough to wake the dead, served in thick white mugs that had been washed thousands of times but still held the warmth like a blessing. And the pie. Lord have mercy, that woman could make a peach pie that would make angels weep. The crust was flaky as autumn leaves, the filling sweet and tart at the same time. And when you took that first bite, it was like tasting summer itself, concentrated into something perfect and fleeting and unforgettable. I remember sitting there one rainy Thursday afternoon when I was about 12, nursing a chocolate milkshake thick enough to stand a spoon in and pretending to do homework while really listening to the grown-ups talk. The rain was pattering against the windows like fingers on a piano, and the diner was full of the comfortable sound of people who knew each other well, voices weaving together like threads in a quilt. That's when I learned that Mr. Peterson's corn crop was struggling because of the late frost, that the Garrett family's youngest had made honor roll again despite everyone thinking he'd never amount to much, and that someone needed to organize volunteers for the church fundraiser to fix the roof before winter set in. Without anyone making a formal announcement or calling a meeting, problems got solved and celebrations got planned, all over coffee and Millie's famous meatloaf. Mrs. Thompson would offer to help with the fundraiser, young Bobby Martinez would volunteer to check on Mr. Peterson's fences, and somehow, in the space of an hour, the community would reorganize itself around whatever needed doing. That's how it worked in our town, not through committees or official channels, but through the simple act of paying attention to each other, of caring enough to notice when someone needed help. It was there in that worn booth by the window where I could watch the world go by on Main Street that I first laid eyes on Sarah Beth Collins. She was sitting with her grandmother, picking at a piece of apple pie and reading a book that looked far too advanced for someone our age. Her hair caught the afternoon light filtering through the rain-streaked window like spun gold, and something in my 12-year-old heart just knew. Even then, even at that awkward age when I was all elbows and knees and had a voice that cracked at the the most embarrassing moments. I knew she was special, knew she was going to matter in ways I couldn't even imagine yet. Sarah Beth had moved to town that spring with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident down in Georgia. One of those tragedies that strike like lightning, sudden and devastating and impossible to understand. The whole community had wrapped around them like a quilt, making sure they had everything they needed and more. Mrs. Patterson brought fresh flowers every week, bouquets from her shop that brightened up that little house on Maple Street like sunshine after rain. The Methodist Church organized meal trains that lasted for months, casseroles and soups and homemade bread appearing on their doorstep like gifts from angels. And somehow, without anyone making a big show of it, that little house became a home again, filled with the kind of love that doesn't come from blood but from choice, from community, from the decision to care about people just because they're people. I worked up the courage to talk to Sarah Beth a few weeks later, down at Miller's Creek, where all us kids would go to skip stones and catch minnows when the summer heat became too much to bear. The creek ran clear and cold through the heart of our county, winding its way between farms and pastures like a silver ribbon tying everything together. Willow trees hung over the water, their branches trailing in the current like long green hair, and dragonflies danced above the surface, their wings catching the light like stained glass windows. She was sitting on the old wooden dock that Mr. Miller had built for the neighborhood children, weathered planks that had absorbed decades of summer sun and winter snow, her bare feet dangling in the cool water, still reading that same book that seemed to hold all the secrets of the universe. The water made gentle lapping sounds against the dock posts, and somewhere upstream, a kingfisher called out his harsh cry, a sound that meant summer and freedom and endless possibilities. "What you reading?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I sat down beside her, leaving what I hoped was a respectable distance between us while my heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird trying to escape. She looked up with eyes the color of creek water in autumn, brown and green and gold all mixed together, deep enough to lose yourself in and warm enough to make you want to try. When she smiled, it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds, transforming her whole face and making me forget every smart thing I'd ever thought to say. "It's about a boy who goes on an adventure," she said simply, closing the book and giving me her full attention in a way that made me feel like I was the most interesting person in the world. "He has to leave everything he knows to find something he's lost." "What's your name?" "I'm Jake," I said, suddenly wishing I had a more impressive name, something that sounded like the heroes in the books she was always reading, something that might be worthy of those autumn-colored eyes. "I'm Sarah Beth," she replied, and the way she said it made it sound like music, like poetry, like the most beautiful name anyone had ever spoken. "Want to help me catch fireflies later? Grandma says they're like little pieces of magic, and magic is better when you share it with someone else." That evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of orange and purple and rose, Sarah Beth and I ran through the tall grass behind her grandmother's house, mason jars in hand, chasing those tiny lights that blinked on and off like nature's own Christmas decorations. The grass was cool and soft against our bare feet, and the air smelled of honeysuckle and fresh-cut hay and the promise of stars that would soon fill the sky like scattered diamonds. We caught dozens of them, watching them glow soft and warm in our glass prisons, tiny lanterns that seemed to hold all the wonder of summer nights. But Sarah Beth insisted we set them free again after just a few minutes, because that's what you do with magic. You appreciate it, you hold it close for a moment, but you don't try to keep it forever. You let it go so it can light up the world for someone else. "That's what Grandma taught me," she said as we watched the last firefly blink away into the darkness. "Beautiful things aren't meant to be caged. They're meant to be shared, to make the world a little brighter for everyone." The years that followed were painted in the colors of small-town summers and the gentle rhythm of rural life. Seasons that rolled by like chapters in a book you never want to end. There were Friday night football games where the whole town would pack into the bleachers, cheering for boys we'd watched grow up. Boys whose daddies had played on the same field 20 years before and whose granddaddies had built those very stands with their own hands. The marching band would play with more enthusiasm than skill, brass instruments gleaming under the Friday night lights. And the cheerleaders would lead chants that echoed across the cornfields long after the game was over, voices carrying on the night air like prayers of hope and pride. There were 4th of July parades down Main Street, red, white, and blue celebrations that brought out the best in everyone, where Mr. Henderson would drive his antique tractor decorated with streamers that Sarah Beth and I had helped tie on that morning. our fingers working together to create something beautiful for the whole town to enjoy. The fire department would throw candy to the children lining the sidewalks, little hands reaching up to catch sweet treasures, while parents watched with smiles that spoke of their own childhood memories. Mrs. Patterson would hand out small American flags that people would wave with genuine pride and gratitude, understanding that freedom isn't free and that some things are worth celebrating with your whole heart. Summer evenings meant community barbecues in the park, where the men would gather around the grills like priests at an altar, debating the proper way to smoke ribs and whether charcoal was better than gas, while the women laid out dishes that told the story of our town in every bite. Mrs. Johnson's famous potato salad, creamy and rich with hard-boiled eggs and just a touch of mustard. The Martinez family's incredible tamales, corn husks hiding tender meat and masa that had been seasoned with love and tradition passed down through generations. And always, always, Mr. Henderson's sweet corn, grilled to perfection and dripping with butter, kernels that popped with the taste of summer itself. The children would run wild between the picnic tables, playing tag and hide and seek, while fireflies began their nightly dance. Young voices calling out in games that had been played for generations, games that connected them to every child who had ever run through those same fields under those same stars. The adults would settle into lawn chairs as the sun began to set, cold beverages in hand, conversations flowing like the creek that ran through the heart of our county. Easy and natural and full of the comfortable silences that come when people truly know each other. Someone would always bring out a guitar, and voices would join together in songs that everyone knew by heart, melodies that seemed to rise from the earth itself. Country roads that made everyone think of home, Sweet Caroline that got the whole crowd singing along, and American Pie that went on for what seemed like hours, but nobody minded because it was our song, our story, our way of marking time and place and the things that mattered most. But it wasn't just the celebrations that bound us together like family. It was the quiet moments too, the everyday kindnesses that wove through our lives like golden thread through homespun cloth, the small acts of love that nobody ever talked about, but everybody remembered. When Mrs. Chun broke her hip the winter I turned 15, slipping on ice outside the post office, the whole neighborhood just naturally reorganized itself around her needs without anyone having to ask or assign duties or make lists. Someone was always stopping by with groceries or a hot meal. Young folks would shovel her walk without being asked, and her mail got collected and sorted and brought inside where it was warm and safe. That same winter, an ice storm knocked out power for most of the county. Lines down and transformers blown, and the whole world turned into a crystal palace that was beautiful to look at but dangerous to live in. But instead of huddling alone in cold houses, burning candles, and worrying about pipes freezing, everyone gravitated toward the community center, where the backup generator kept the lights on and the coffee hot and hope alive in the darkest hours. We played cards by lamplight, the soft glow making everyone's faces look younger, like we were all children again gathered around for story time. We told tales that had been passed down through generations, stories of other winters and other challenges, and the ways people had always found to take care of each other when times got hard. We shared whatever food we had brought from home, creating feasts from contributions that individually might not have been much, but together became abundance. Proof that when people come together with open hearts, there's always enough to go around. Children who usually spent their evenings glued to screens instead learned to play checkers and chess, their young minds discovering the pleasure of games that required thought and strategy and patience. They listened to their grandparents talk about the old days, stories of walking to school in snow that was that deep, of radio shows that brought families together around the kitchen table, of times when entertainment wasn't something you consumed, but something you created together. It was during that storm that I learned Mr. Henderson had fought in Vietnam, something he'd never talked about before, not in all the years I'd known him. But there in that candlelit room, surrounded by neighbors who had become family, something in the atmosphere made it safe for him to share pieces of his story that he'd kept locked away for decades. He told us about letters from home that kept him going when everything else seemed hopeless, about the small town values that guided him through the darkest times, about learning to appreciate simple things like hot coffee and dry socks and the sound of friendly voices. He talked about coming back to find that some things had changed. Boys he'd grown up with were married now, had children of their own, had started businesses or left for college or the city. But the important things, the things that really mattered, those had stayed the same. This place, he said, gesturing around the candlelit room, full of neighbors who had become family, young and old sitting together in the warm glow of community. This is what I was fighting for. Not just the land, though the land matters. Not just the buildings, though they hold our memories, but the people on it, the way we take care of each other, the way we show up when someone needs us, the way we remember that we're all in this together, that none of us makes it alone. His words settled over us like a blessing, like something we all needed to hear but hadn't known how to say ourselves. In that moment, with the storm raging outside and the warmth of community surrounding us inside, I understood something fundamental about what it means to belong somewhere, really belong, not just as a resident or a property owner, but as part of something larger than yourself. As I grew older, those lessons became the foundation of everything I believed in, the compass that guided me through choices and challenges and the 1,000 small decisions that shape a life. When I left for college, heading off to a state university 3 hours away that might as well have been on the other side of the world, I carried that small-town wisdom with me like a talisman, always pointing me toward home. The big city was exciting, full of opportunities and experiences I could never have imagined growing up on our little farm. There were museums and theaters and restaurants that served food from countries I'd only read about in books. There were people from everywhere with stories and backgrounds and dreams that opened my eyes to how big and diverse and complicated the world really was. But it was also lonely in ways I hadn't expected, surrounded by millions of people who barely made eye contact on the subway, who lived their lives in separate bubbles that rarely touched or overlapped. I remember calling home one particularly difficult evening during my sophomore year, homesick and overwhelmed by the pace of city life, feeling lost in ways that had nothing to do with geography. My mama answered on the second ring, like she always did, her voice reaching across the miles like a warm embrace, and before I could even explain what was wrong, she was already making it better just by being herself. "Baby boy," she said in that voice that could soothe any hurt, that had kissed away scraped knees and broken hearts and fears that came with growing up. "Tell me what's troubling you." I tried to explain the feeling of being lost in a crowd, of missing the way people knew each other's stories, of longing for the sound of screen doors and cicadas and Mr. Henderson's tractor puttering across the field at sunrise. I told her about professors who didn't know my name, about sitting in dining halls surrounded by strangers, about the way the city never got truly quiet, never offered the deep peace that came with country nights when the only sounds were crickets and tree frogs and the distant whistle of trains carrying dreams across the darkness. "Honey," she said after I'd finished pouring out my heart, her voice gentle as rain on summer leaves, "you carry all of us with you wherever you go. Every lesson learned, every kindness shown, every sunset watched from this old porch. It's all part of who you are now. You don't lose that just because you're in a different place. Home isn't just a location on a map, baby. It's a way of being in the world." She was right, of course. Mama usually was. But it took me a few more years to really understand what she meant, to realize that home isn't just a place you come from, but a place you carry with you, a set of values and relationships and ways of treating people that shape how you move through the world no matter where you find yourself. I came back after graduation, drawn by something deeper than nostalgia, something that felt like destiny calling me home. Sarah Beth had stayed too, teaching at the elementary school, where we'd both learned to read and write and dream, where patient teachers had nurtured our young minds and helped us believe we could become anything we wanted to be. She had grown into the kind of woman who could quiet a classroom full of rowdy 6-year-olds with just a look, who remembered every child's birthday and knew exactly what each one needed to hear on their worst days, who understood that teaching was about so much more than lesson plans and test scores. We were married in the little white church where both our grandmothers had been wed, surrounded by everyone who had watched us grow up, who had seen us as children catching fireflies and now celebrated as we promised to catch dreams together. The sanctuary was filled with faces that told the story of our lives. Mr. Henderson in his best suit, tears in his eyes as he remembered the little boy who had helped save a baby bird. Millie from the diner, beaming as she watched two of her favorite young people start their new chapter. Mrs. Patterson, her hands full of flowers that made the whole church smell like paradise. Mr. Henderson walked Sarah Beth down the aisle, stepping in for the father she'd lost so young, his weathered hand steady on her arm as he guided her toward the future she'd chosen. When he placed her hand in mine and whispered, "Take good care of our girl," there wasn't a dry eye in that sanctuary. In that moment, I understood that love isn't just about two people finding each other. It's about community, about the web of relationships that support and sustain and celebrate the most important moments of our lives. We moved into a little house just down the road from where I'd grown up, close enough that I could still hear the familiar sounds of home. The rooster crowing at dawn like he was announcing the birth of each new day. The screen door at what used to be Millie's Diner opening and closing as a new generation of owners carried on the tradition. The distant hum of conversation on summer evenings when neighbors gathered on their front porches to watch the sun go down and count their blessings. Our first summer as a married couple, Sarah Beth started a garden in our backyard, planting tomatoes and green beans and flowers that would attract butterflies and hummingbirds, creating a little piece of paradise right outside our kitchen window. I built her a little fence around it, nothing fancy, just enough to keep the rabbits out while still letting her see everything growing from the kitchen table where we'd share our morning coffee and plan our days. That autumn, Mr. Henderson had a heart attack while bringing in the last of his corn harvest, collapsing right there in the field he'd worked for more than 40 years. The whole town held its breath for 3 days while he fought for his life in the county hospital, machines beeping and humming around him while we all prayed for the man who had been a father figure to half the county. I sat with Clara, his wife of 47 years, holding her weathered hands while she told me stories about their courtship, their children, the dreams they'd built together on that farm next door. She talked about young love and old promises, about seasons of plenty and seasons of want, about the way a good marriage weathers every storm because it's built on something stronger than passion or convenience. It's built on choice, on the daily decision to love and honor and cherish through whatever comes. He always said this land would outlast us all, she whispered, watching the sun set through the hospital window, painting the sky in colors that reminded us both of harvest time and the eternal cycle of planting and growing and gathering in. Said the important thing wasn't owning the land, but belonging to it, being part of something bigger than yourself. Said we were just caretakers for a little while, responsible for leaving it better than we found it. Mr. Henderson pulled through, stubborn as the oak tree in his front yard, tough as the leather boots he'd worn to work every day for decades. But he was never quite the same after that, moving a little slower, sitting on his porch a little longer, watching the seasons change with the eyes of a man who understood how precious and fragile life really is. That winter, he made a decision that surprised everyone. He sold the farm to a young couple from 2 counties over, people who reminded him of himself and Clara when they were starting out, full of dreams and determination and the kind of love that can move mountains or at least clear 40 acres of corn stubble. Land needs young hands, he told me as we watched the new owners move in, their children already exploring every corner of the property just like I had done all those years ago. Their voices carrying across the fields like music, like promises of the future taking root. Needs people who can grow with it, make new memories while respecting the old ones. That's how it works, son. That's how it's always worked. The cycle continued, as cycles do in small towns where time moves differently than the rest of the world, where seasons matter more than schedules and relationships count for more than resumes. Sarah Beth and I had children of our own. First, little Emma, with her mother's eyes and her grandmother's stubborn streak. Then baby James, who seemed to inherit his great-grandfather's gentle way with animals and growing things, who could calm a spooked horse or coax a tomato plant to bloom just by talking to it in that special voice that some people are born knowing. Watching them discover the same creek where their mama and daddy had caught fireflies, seeing them learn to fish from the same dock where we'd shared our first real conversation, felt like watching the world renew itself, like being part of something eternal and beautiful and larger than any individual life. They learned to skip stones from Mr. Henderson, who had become their honorary grandfather, and they spent summer afternoons in what was now called Emma's Cafe, charming everyone with their gap-toothed grins and endless questions about everything from why the sky is blue to where babies come from to whether fireflies really are pieces of magic like great-grandma Sarah used to say. Emma's first day of school was a milestone for the whole community, another generation taking their place in the long chain of learning and growing and becoming that stretched back through decades of children who had walked through those same doors. Sarah Beth walked her to the same classroom where she'd learned her letters, where 3 generations of children had sat in similar desks and dreamed similar dreams and been nurtured by teachers who understood that education is about so much more than facts and figures. Mrs. Thompson, who had taught half the town to read and was now Mrs. Thompson, who had taught half the town to read and was now nearing retirement after 40 years in the same classroom, welcomed Emma with the same patient smile she'd given thousands of children over the years. Her hair was silver now, and her hands moved a little more slowly when she wrote on the blackboard, but her eyes still sparkled with the joy of watching young minds discover the magic of words and numbers and ideas. "Another generation," she said to Sarah Beth as they watched Emma hang up her little backpack in the cubby that had held countless other backpacks over the years. "Another chance to get it right, to help them become everything they're meant to be." The seasons turned, as they always do, bringing change and constancy in equal measure, teaching us that some things endure while others fade away like morning mist. Some years were harder than others. Drought summers when the corn struggled and everyone worried about the harvest. When rain became a prayer on everyone's lips and storm clouds were watched with desperate hope. Winter storms that tested the strength of our community bonds, reminding us that we really were all in this together. That neighbor helping neighbor wasn't just a nice idea, but a necessity for survival. There were moments of loss that reminded us how precious and fragile life really is. When Millie passed away in her sleep one spring morning, the whole town mourned not just a person, but an institution, a piece of our shared story that could never be replaced. When the old church bell cracked during a thunderstorm, it felt like losing a voice that had called our community to worship and celebration for over a century. But through it all, the essential rhythms remained, the heartbeat of small town life that connected us to generations past and future. Friday night football games where 3 generations cheered side by side, grandfathers pointing out plays to grandsons who would one day do the same for their own children. Sunday dinners where recipes passed down through families were shared with neighbors who had become family, where the blessing included gratitude for the hands that prepared the food and the hearts that shared it. Summer evenings when children still caught fireflies and adults still gathered on front porches to watch the sun paint the sky, sharing stories and silence in equal measure, understanding that the best conversations happen when there's no hurry, no agenda, nothing more important than the simple pleasure of being together as another day draws to its close. I think about all this now, sitting here on the same porch where my daddy used to rock, and think his own thoughts about time and memory and the things that matter most. The chair creaks in the same rhythm it did when I was a boy, and the view hasn't changed much. Cornfields stretching to the horizon. The old oak tree that's weathered every storm for longer than anyone can remember. The dirt road that leads to town and carries the dreams of every generation that's called this place home. Emma is grown now, teaching at the high school in the next county, but still coming home every Sunday for dinner. Still bringing her own children to catch fireflies in the same fields where she learned to run. James took over the farm, bringing new ideas while respecting old traditions, understanding that progress and preservation aren't opposites, but partners in the dance of sustainable living. Sarah Beth still tends her garden, though she moves a little slower now, and her hair has gone silver in the same soft way her grandmother's did. But her smile is the same one that caught my 12-year-old heart all those years ago by Miller's Creek. And her laugh still sounds like music floating across summer fields. Still makes me grateful every day for the gift of sharing this life with someone who understands that the best things in life aren't things at all but moments, memories, and the love that holds them all together. The old diner closed when the couple who bought it from Millie's estate decided to retire, but Emma, our Emma, surprised everyone by buying the building and bringing it back to life, keeping the original red booths and the jukebox that still plays Patsy Cline. She understands that some things are too important to change, that a place can hold the heart of a community if you let it, if you honor what came before while making room for what comes next. Mr. Henderson passed last spring, just as the corn was pushing up through the soil in neat green rows that spoke of hope and renewal and the eternal promise of harvest time. The whole town turned out for his funeral, sharing stories about his kindness, his wisdom, the way he'd touch your life without you even realizing it until later, when you found yourself passing along lessons he taught you to someone else who needed to hear them. Clara still lives in the house they shared for so many years, and sometimes I see her sitting on the porch at sunset, probably remembering their own love story, their own journey from young dreamers to wise elders who understood that the best legacy you can leave is the kindness you've shown and the lives you've touched along the way. The young family who bought their farm as children now, 2 little boys who remind me so much of myself at that age, curious about everything, eager to help with the animals, full of questions about how things grow and why the sky changes colors, and whether they'll ever be big enough to drive the tractor by themselves. I find myself becoming the neighbor Mr. Henderson was to me, sharing what I learned from watching him, passing along the quiet wisdom that binds generations together like invisible thread. This is what I've learned, sitting here in the gathering dusk, listening to the familiar sounds of home, the screen door of the new family's house creaking open, children's laughter floating across the fields like birdsong, the distant hum of conversation from neighboring porches where other families are counting their own blessings. Life in a small town isn't about the absence of change. It's about the presence of continuity. It's about understanding that we're all part of something larger than ourselves, connected by invisible threads of kindness and shared experience that stretch back through generations and forward into futures we can only imagine. We carry each other's stories, celebrate each other's joys, and hold each other up in times of sorrow. We know that a casserole delivered to a grieving family means more than any words ever could, that showing up matters more than having the right thing to say, that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is simply bearing witness to their life, letting them know they matter, that their story is worth telling and worth remembering. The fireflies are starting to blink on and off in the tall grass, just like they did when Sarah Beth and I were children, just like they did when my parents were young, just like they'll do long after we're all gone. There's comfort in that continuity, in knowing that some things endure while others change, that the important things, love, kindness, community, the sacred ordinary moments that make up a life, these things remain constant as the North Star, guiding us home when we lose our way. Every summer evening, when those tiny lights begin their ancient dance in the gathering darkness, I'm reminded of that little girl who taught me that beautiful things aren't meant to be caged, that magic is better when it's shared, that the most precious gifts we can give each other are time and attention and a willingness to see wonder in the simplest things. I think about the hands that shaped me, Mr. Henderson's weathered fingers showing me how to hold a baby bird, Mama's gentle touch smoothing away childhood fears, Sarah Beth's young hand in mine as we ran through summer fields chasing dreams that seemed as elusive and beautiful as fireflies themselves. Those hands are mostly still now, some folded in eternal rest, others moving more slowly with the passage of years. But their influence lives on in every kindness I try to show, every moment I choose to pay attention to the magic happening all around us. The seasons will keep turning, as they always have, bringing new challenges and new blessings, new children to chase fireflies and new stories to add to the collection we've been building here for generations. Young couples will fall in love over coffee at Emma's Cafe. Babies will take their first steps in these same yards where their grandparents learned to walk, and the eternal cycle of planting and growing and harvesting will continue to mark time in ways that matter more than any clock or calendar. Tomorrow I'll wake up to the sound of the rooster crowing, just like I have for most of my 60-plus years. I'll make coffee the way my mama taught me, strong and black with just a touch of cream, and I'll step out onto this porch that's witnessed so many sunrises, so many conversations, so many moments of quiet gratitude for the gift of belonging somewhere completely. I'll breathe in the morning air, sweet with the smell of honeysuckle and fresh-cut grass, and the promise of another day in this place that shaped me, surrounded by people who loved me into becoming who I am today. And I'll be grateful, deeply grateful, for this corner of the world where neighbors still know each other's names, where children can run free in summer fields, where the pace of life allows for front porch conversations and Sunday dinners that stretch into the evening hours like prayers of Thanksgiving. That's the gift of small town life, friends. Not the absence of troubles or sorrow. Lord knows we've had our share of both. But the presence of people who will stand with you through whatever comes. People who understand that the most important things in life can't be bought or sold, only shared and passed down from one generation to the next, like recipes and stories and the knowledge of how to help a baby bird find its way home. If this story has touched something deep in your heart, if it's reminded you of people who shaped you or places that held you or moments when you understood what it really means to belong somewhere, then I hope you'll take a moment to subscribe to PorchTales and ring that notification bell, because stories like this one need to be told and retold, passed down like family heirlooms to people who understand their value. Hit that like button if this brought back memories of your own firefly summers, your own small town heroes, your own moments of discovering that home isn't just a place on a map, but a feeling in your heart. Share this with someone who needs to remember that there are still places in this world where people take care of each other, where handshake means something, where children can grow up knowing they're surrounded by a community that believes in them and wants to see them succeed. Share it with someone who's lost touch with their roots, someone who's forgotten that the simple things, a neighbor's kindness, a family dinner, the sight of fireflies dancing in summer darkness. These are the things that really matter, the things that make life worth living. The sun's nearly gone now, painting the sky in those same colors I've watched turn to stars 1,000 times before. Colors that speak of endings and beginnings, of the eternal cycle that connects all of us to something larger and more beautiful than we can fully understand. In a few minutes, I'll head inside to where Sarah Beth is probably reading in her favorite chair, and we'll share a cup of tea and talk about our day. Our children, our grandchildren, the way the corn is growing, and how blessed we are to call this place home. But for now, I'll sit here a little longer, listening to the night sounds begin, crickets and tree frogs, and the distant whistle of the evening train carrying dreams across the darkness. I'll watch those fireflies dance their ancient dance in the gathering night. And I'll remember that some things never change, some things never should. And that home is not just where you're from, but where your heart learns to be still, where your story becomes part of a larger story that will outlive us all. Subscribe to PorchTales, friends. Like this video if it moved you. Share it with someone who still believes in the power of stories to heal and connect, and remind us of who we really are when all the noise of the modern world falls away. Because in a world that's changing faster than we can sometimes understand, we need these reminders of what endures, what matters, what makes us human. The fireflies are calling. The porch light's on. Come on home.